Magic mushrooms ought to be legalised, so says the headline, as a potential medical treatment for depression. This is according to a new report on the benefits of the drug. Researchers say the active psychedelic ingredient in the fungus has been shown in medical trials to benefit people suffering from depression. Well, joining us now is Jo Neill, Professor of Psychopharmacology at Manchester University and one of the researchers, co-authors of this particular study. Professor, a very warm welcome to you. A significant number of our viewers tune in around this time to see me mangle the names of drugs. Psilocybin.
Absolutely right. Yes, that's spot on.
Bang on. What does it do?
Lovely to be here. I just want to say I'm chair of the Medical Psychedelics Working Group for Drug Science, the UK's independent body providing evidence-based information about drugs. So just to be clear, we are asking the government to reschedule psilocybin from Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations to Schedule 2. So I'm an academic researcher. There's a number of research studies going on in the UK into the medical benefits of psychedelic drugs, most notably psilocybin. So it is the active constituent of magic mushrooms. But for this work, it is made or synthesized by chemists in the laboratory. The initial research is very promising that this medicine can treat people with very hard to treat psychiatric conditions. So we're talking about illnesses like PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, which is suffered by combat veterans, survivors of sexual trauma. We are also talking about treatment-resistant depression. So these are people who've been suffering from depression for 25 years, for example, and no other treatment works for them. So we're not suggesting that current medications are not beneficial. For many people, traditional antidepressants work very, very well. This is for people who are not responding to current treatments and really have no options left. And we know there are very high rates of suicide in these patients.
Professor, just on the point about moving it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, the effect of that would be what? That easier to have trials, easier to use on an experimental basis? How would it work in practice?
And, I have read all the press reports, and the Home Office have quite rightly stated it is possible to do research with a drug that is in Schedule 1, but it is extremely difficult. So any laboratory doing this research has to apply for a Schedule 1 license. I'm an animal researcher. For me, it took me a year. It's an enormously bureaucratic process. It cost me over £3,000. And that's just for an animal permission to do animal studies. For a clinical trial, the barriers are even greater. So one colleague, Dr. James Rucker, working at King's in London, who's conducting the trial on treatment-resistant depression, he had to pay over £20,000 before he could get any of the drug into a participant in his clinical trial, because he needed 6 separate controlled drugs licenses at every step along the way, in the pharmacy, where they dispense the drug, where they do the blinding, where they put it into capsules and so on. So that's £20,000 out of your research budget. And this is taxpayers' money. And, again, the delays are enormous. There's an incredible amount of bureaucracy. The form takes a long time to fill in. You have to be inspected by the Home Office. And the issue here is that with Schedule 2 drug research, so we're talking about drugs like heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, ketamine, we have no such restrictions. So anybody wanting to research these drugs can buy them from the regulated suppliers, keep them safely, and use them perfectly safely. So
that's extraordinary, isn't it? That's really extraordinary. And why is it seen as particularly dangerous? I mean, why is it considered to be such a risk? Presumably it must be.
This is one of the problems about conducting research with psychedelic medicines. So there's so much misinformation and stigma around these drugs. That's another issue with working, doing research with a drug such as this. People perceive them to be dangerous when actually, if used in the right way, which is what we're trying to enable, they are very safe medicines. Of course, we're talking about medicinal use here. And it's very important to be clear that it's all about set and setting, and psychotherapy will accompany the treatment with these medicines. But these medicines are very badly needed for so many hard to treat disorders. And we want to do more research. We want to understand how these drugs produce their...
Well, Professor, we haven't got very long, but just on that point, I mean, it works with or produces serotonin to be produced in the brain. Am I right in saying that? Which is presumably, I think you've already suggested, is something that existing drugs do. What specifically is it, at least in the preliminary trials, that we're saying that psilocybin is capable of achieving here, which other serotonin-producing drugs don't do?
So these work, thanks to the research of David Nutt and Robin Carhart-Harris at Imperial, we've been able to do imaging studies, and these drugs have incredibly profound effects in the brain because of the way in which they work, which of course Indigenous populations have known for thousands of years, the profoundness of the effect. The medical model is very different as well. Many people will only need 1, 2, or 3 doses of this under medical supervision, and they can be healed. I spoke to a combat veteran and who had to go out of this country, and I think that's absolutely shameful for the UK, that he could not receive the treatment he needs in this country. He went to Holland and took these drugs in a hotel room on his own, which is absolutely not what we would recommend. But he had learned enough about this to be able to heal himself. And this was 2 years ago, and he is still well. Now, be clear, I'm absolutely not suggesting that is something that people should do. It has to be under medical supervision, and this is what we're keen to do, or we're trying to do. Rescheduling psilocybin will enable this research to happen, so that we can bring these drugs into psychiatry as much needed medicines for people who badly need them.
Professor, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Professor Jo Neill, appreciate your time.